Imagine waking up every morning, paying your bills on time, keeping your property clean, and minding your own business only to find out your so-called neighbors have been stealing from you in plain sight. That's exactly what happened to me when I discovered two sisters, the infamous Karens of our small town, had been secretly plugging into my ranch's power box. Day after day, week after week, my electric bill kept climbing, and I couldn't figure out why. I thought maybe my old appliances were draining too much, or maybe my well pump was failing. But the truth was more outrageous than I could have ever imagined. These women thought they were clever. They'd sneak around in the early morning or after dark, dragging their heavy extension cords across the fence, jamming them into my box, and then running them back to their camper parked behind their mother's house. They weren't just charging phones or a light, they were running their whole setup off my dime. But here's the kicker. What they didn't know was that the box they kept plugging into wasn't just for electricity. It was tied directly into a backup system that powered my septic tank's pump. Mess with it, and you weren't just risking a blackout, you were risking a whole lot worse. When the truth came out, it wasn't just shocking, it was nasty, messy, and unforgettable. Their smug grins quickly turned into shrieks of horror, and my problem with the soaring power bill became their nightmare. It was poetic justice in the rawest, funniest, and most disgusting way possible. And believe me, after this, they'll never dare touch anything on my ranch again. Life on the ranch was supposed to be peaceful. That's why I moved out there in the first place, away from the buzz of town, away from nosy neighbors, and away from the constant hum of traffic. My land stretched wide enough that I could stand on my front porch, sip my coffee, and see nothing but open pasture, tree lines, and the occasional deer cutting across the grass at dawn. It was quiet, almost too quiet sometimes, but it was mine. Out here, every sunrise felt like a fresh promise, and every sunset felt like closure. Or at least, that's how it should have been. The peace started unraveling the day I noticed my electric bill had practically doubled. At first, I thought maybe I had left something running. My well pump sometimes pulled heavy power, especially in summer when I was irrigating. Maybe the old freezer in the barn was finally giving up. I even blamed my water heater for a bit. I went around my property like a detective, flicking switches, unplugging appliances, and trying to catch the phantom drain, but nothing explained it. I called the power company, sat on hold for half an hour, and finally got through to some woman who insisted there was no unusual activity on my account. To them, everything looked normal. To me, it felt like my house had turned into a bottomless pit of energy. I paid the bill, grumbling about it, and told myself it was probably just a one-time thing. The next month came, and sure enough, the bill was even higher. Not just by a little, it jumped again. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. Now, here's the thing about small towns. You don't have strangers causing problems, you've got neighbors. And everyone around here knew about the two sisters who lived just down the way. They had a reputation. People called them the Karens not because that was their actual name, but because of their behavior. Loud, demanding, entitled, and always in someone else's business. If a dog barked too long, they called animal control. If a truck idled too close to their fence line, they complained about pollution. If a kid cut across their yard, they threatened to call the sheriff. I'd had a few run-ins with them already. Nothing major, but enough to confirm what people said. They had once accused me of letting my cattle look at their property too long, like I had trained the cows to spy on them. Another time, they came banging on my door because they swore the dust from my dirt road was causing their allergies. I tried to keep my distance after that. The less I dealt with them, the better. But when my bill kept climbing, a little suspicion started scratching in the back of my mind. I began checking my property line more carefully, walking along the fence at odd hours. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just keeping an eye out. My power box sat a little ways off from the house, near the edge of the pasture. It wasn't unusual. A lot of ranch setups have boxes out in the open where the company can read meters. I never worried about it. Why would I? Who in their right mind would mess with someone else's electricity? Still, something didn't sit right with me. One morning, just before sunrise, I was out feeding the horses when I noticed a faint glint of light near the box. It was still dark enough that the sky hadn't turned gray yet, so any shine stuck out. I squinted, trying to see through the dim. At first, I thought maybe it was dew reflecting off the metal, but then I caught movement. Two figures crouched low, near the box. I froze, barely breathing, and watched. The figures fumbled with something, then dragged a long, heavy cord out toward the fence. I felt my stomach drop when I realized what I was seeing. They weren't strangers. They weren't vandals. They were the Karen sisters. There they were, in their pajamas of all things. Hair sticking out in every direction, yanking a thick orange extension cord across the pasture like it was a lifeline. They worked quick, like they'd done it before. One sister plugged the cord into my box with a practiced shove, while the other hauled the end toward their property. They giggled like kids sneaking candy, then scrambled back under the fence line and disappeared into the trees. My jaw tightened so hard, I thought my teeth might crack. It suddenly all made sense. The unexplained bills, the steady drain, the mystery power use. They weren't just stealing a little, they were running something big. probably their whole setup. I'd seen that they had an old camper parked behind their mother's house, and word was they'd been living out of it. Now I understood how they were powering it. I stood there in the half-light, hands clenched into fists, torn between storming over and ripping the cord outright. Then and there, or letting it play out. Confronting them would have been easy. I could have marched over, shouted them down, and threatened to call the sheriff, but part of me wanted to be smarter about it. The Karens were known for twisting stories, playing the victim, and stirring up trouble. If I accused them too soon, they'd deny it, cry harassment, and somehow make me the bad guy. I'd seen them pull the same act on other neighbors, so I made a choice. I didn't stop them that morning. I let them have their stolen power, let them drag their filthy cord across my land like parasites. But I kept watching. I paid attention to the way they hooked it up, to the times of day they did it, to the smug little smirks on their faces when they thought no one was looking. And as I watched, I thought about the box they were so eager to tap into. They thought they were clever, thought they'd found a free ride. But what they didn't know, or what they couldn't possibly know, was that the outlet they were stealing from wasn't just tied to the house, it was tied into something else, something that was going to turn their little scam into the nastiest mistake of their lives. After catching them red-handed that morning, I couldn't shake the image out of my head. The Karen sisters in their pajamas, sneaking like raccoons at dawn, stealing my power like it was their right. All day, the memory burned in me. Every time I looked at my electric bill sitting on the counter, the numbers felt like a slap in the face. They weren't just being cheap, they were stealing from me. But I didn't act right away. Instead, I played it careful. I knew better than to storm across the property line with anger in my voice. Folks like those sisters thrived on drama. If I gave them a scene, they'd twist it into something else before sundown. They'd cry that I was harassing them, call the sheriff, and somehow make the story sound like I was the villain. I had seen them spin lies before, and the sheriff, sick of their endless complaints, usually avoided getting involved unless things turned serious. So I decided to make it serious, but in my own way. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined their camper glowing bright with lights that weren't theirs to use. I pictured them watching TV, running heaters, charging their phones, and laughing about how easy it was to take from me. The thought of it gnawed at me until finally I got up, slipped on my boots, and walked out into the pasture with nothing but a flashlight. I traced their cord, dotted, stretched like a bright orange snake across the grass, half buried in dew. My light followed it to the fence line, where it squeezed through a gap they had cut in the wire. I crouched low, ran my hand along the cord, and shook my head. It wasn't just any cord, it was one of those heavy-duty types meant for power tools. Long, thick, and expensive. They hadn't picked it up for nothing. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment thing. It was planned. I stood there for a while, debating whether to yank it free right then. My fingers itched to rip it out of the box, coil it up, and toss it back over their fence. But no, I had to be smarter. Catching them once wasn't enough. I needed proof. Something undeniable. Something that would make it impossible for them to play their usual games. So I left it for the next several days. I became an observer. At dawn and dusk, I'd station myself near the edge of the field, pretending to check on the horses or mend the fence. Really, I was watching the sisters. And sure enough, like clockwork, they came scurrying back to the box every night, plugging in their cord, whispering and giggling like thieves. Then, before the sun was fully up, they'd sneak back, unplug it, and drag the cord home. I couldn't believe their nerve. It wasn't just the theft, it was the boldness of it. They acted like it was perfectly normal to crawl onto someone else's property and leech off their power, like they were entitled to it. That was the thing about them. Entitlement oozed out of everything they did. They thought rules were for other people, not for them. But I had an advantage they didn't know about. That box they were stealing from wasn't just a power outlet. It was connected to my septic system's backup pump. When the main septic setup reached high levels, the pump kicked on, powered by that line. It wasn't something that happened often, but when it did, it drew a hefty surge of power. If the pump got blocked or overloaded, things could get, well, let's just say, messy. The sisters had no idea they were tapping into a hornet's nest. By the third week, I knew I had to do more than just watch. My patience was thinning, the bills stacked higher, and every time I opened the envelope, my blood boiled hotter. I started imagining how to expose them. Maybe I'd set up a camera near the box. Maybe I'd call a buddy who worked with a power company to check the meter in person. Or maybe, just maybe, I'd let their own greed trigger the disaster I knew was coming, because sooner or later, they were going to overload that system, and when they did, all the sewage and sludge that pumped kept in check would have nowhere to go but up, and guess whose property line it was closest to. There's still, a part of me wanted to confront them, to see the look on their smug faces when I caught them in the act. So one morning, instead of staying hidden, I stood out in plain sight near the box just as they were finishing their dirty work. The older sister froze first. She had the cord in her hand, halfway plugged in. Her face went pale as she spotted me leaning against the fence. The younger one hissed at her to hurry up, not realizing I was right there. When she finally turned and saw me, she dropped the cord like it was a snake. For a long moment, none of us said a word. Then the older one tried to play it off. "Oh, hey there," she said, her voice high and fake sweet. "We were just, checking something. Your box was sparking earlier. Thought we'd, make sure everything's safe." I didn't move. I just stared at them. The younger sister crossed her arms and added, "Yeah, you should be thanking us. Could have been a fire hazard." That's when I smiled, not kindly, but the kind of smile that said I wasn't buying a single word. I said slowly, "It's funny. I've been watching you to plug into this box for weeks. My bills have doubled. And now, suddenly, here you are, checking it again." What a coincidence. Their faces flushed red, then pale again. They stammered excuses, tripping over each other's lies, trying to patch the story together. But the damage was done. I had them rattled. I didn't call them thieves right then though. I didn't shout, didn't threaten. Instead, I leaned in closer and said, "Keep it up. Just keep plugging into that box. Let's see how that works out for you." They didn't know what I meant, but the way their eyes flickered nervously told me they sensed a trap. And they were right, because while they thought they'd found free power, I knew they'd actually tied themselves to something far nastier, something that was about to blow up in their faces in a way they'd never forget, and all I had to do was wait. After my little showdown at the fence, the sisters grew more cautious. They still came creeping out at night, but now they glanced around nervously, whispering to each other before daring to touch the box. Their bravado had cracked, but not enough to stop them. Greed has a way of blinding people, and the Karens were no exception. They wanted the free power more than they wanted peace. For me, the waiting game had truly begun. I knew what was coming. That septic pump wasn't designed to share. Every time they siphoned power for their camper and then their lights, their heater, even a little fridge I'd seen them haul inside, they strained the line. All it would take was one big cycle from the pump and they'd overload it. I pictured it vividly. The pump struggling, pressure building, sewage bubbling, and then disaster. But I didn't rush it. Timing was everything. Instead, I watched. I started keeping notes, scribbling times in a notebook like some ranch town detective. Monday, 6 a.m. plugged in again. Tuesday, 10 p.m., extension cord spotted. Wednesday, sisters sneaking back, giggling with that same smug confidence. Each entry was another nail in the coffin they were building for themselves. The funny thing was, I almost felt like a hunter waiting for prey to step into a snare. The sisters thought they were clever, thought they'd gotten away with weeks of free living. But all the while, they were circling closer to their own mess. Literally. One chilly evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I sat on my porch with a mug of coffee, watching the faint orange cord stretch across my pasture like a neon arrow pointing toward their sins. The horses stepped over it carelessly, uninterested. A hawk circled above, and in the distance I heard the faint hum of their camper's generator that wasn't theirs either. No, it was mine humming because of my power. It boiled my blood, but I also felt the satisfaction of knowing it wouldn't last out by the second week of this watch. I noticed something else. The sisters were getting bolder again. My warning must have faded in their memory, because they started plugging in during the day too. Sometimes when I drove into town, I'd come back to find the cord stretched and buzzing under full daylight, right there for anyone to see. They didn't even care anymore. That arrogance was going to cost them. The turning point came on a Friday night. The air was heavy, the kind of thick humidity that makes everything feel slow. I was in the barn checking equipment when I heard it, a faint click, hum, that rolled through the quiet like a warning bell. The septic pump had kicked on. I froze, listening. Normally, the pump would whir for a few minutes, do its job, and shut off. But this time, the sound dragged longer, struggling against something. The sisters must have been pulling hard power that night. Lights glowing, TV blaring, maybe even a space heater running. The pump strained, and I knew the system was teetering on the edge. I walked outside, slow and calm, my boots crunching on the gravel. Across the field, the orange cord glowed faint in the moonlight, buzzing with stolen current. I followed it with my eyes until it disappeared into their yard, where I could see the faint flicker of a TV screen through the camper window. I almost laughed. They had no clue what was brewing beneath their feet. The pump groaned again, louder this time, and for a second I thought it might fail right then. But it held on, coughing through its cycle. I breathed out, almost disappointed. Not yet, I told myself. Not yet. Patience. Over the next few days, I could tell the system was weakening. The pump wasn't running smooth anymore. It rattled and clanked when it started, like an old truck on its last legs. The Karens, of course, remained oblivious. They strutted around their camper like queens, sipping sodas and waving at passers-by as though they'd built their kingdom themselves. Meanwhile, I noticed the ground near their fence line getting softer. Damp spots formed where there shouldn't have been any. Small hints that pressure was building underground. I knew enough about septic systems to recognize the warning signs. And if I knew it, then nature sure as hell knew it too. The trap was winding tighter. That week, I toyed with the idea of cutting the cord myself, just to end it cleanly. But every time I grabbed my pliers, I thought about the smug look they'd give if I confronted them. They'd scream harassment, they'd call the sheriff and play dumb. No, I wanted something better, something undeniable. I wanted them to drown in the proof of their own theft. The suspense gnawed at me. Every night I'd lie awake, half hoping I'd hear the telltale gurgle of disaster erupting across the field. But each morning the camper still stood, cord still humming, sisters still smirking, until one night I saw something that told me the end was closer than ever. It was past midnight. I'd stepped outside for air, restless, when I caught sight of movement by the box again. There they were, both sisters, hauling not just one cord but two this time. They split the load, one for their camper, the other dragging toward a second smaller shed in their yard. My jaw tightened. They were doubling down, milking even more from my line. The pump wouldn't last much longer. I leaned against the fence post, hidden in the shadows, and just watched. They laughed as they worked, bragging to each other like thieves drunk on their own cleverness. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough, something about free heat and saving money. The younger one even said, "He can't do anything about it. It's not like he can prove it." Oh, how wrong she was, because soon proof wasn't going to come from me. It was going to bubble up from the ground, raw and undeniable. When they finally vanished back to their camper, I looked at the box, cords humming like veins stretched too tight. The pump clicked faintly beneath the soil, groaning like it was begging for relief. I almost pitied it. Almost I whispered to the night, "Hang in there, old boy. Just one more push. Give them what they deserve." The stage was set. The sisters had grown too bold, too greedy, and too blind. They thought they were untouchable, that my ranch was theirs to leech off forever. But nature doesn't forgive arrogance, and machines don't bend to entitlement. Something was going to give, and when it did, it wouldn't be me footing the bill anymore. It would be them, standing knee-deep in the consequences of their own theft. It happened on a Sunday evening, just when everything seemed too quiet. The sky had turned a pale gold, the kind of light that makes the world look peaceful even when trouble's brewing beneath it. I had just finished supper and was standing on the porch with a glass of sweet tea when I heard the sound I'd been waiting weeks to hear. A low, shuddering groan rumbled through the ground like a warning shot. My head snapped toward the pasture, eyes locked on the power box. The cords stretched out like veins, glowing faintly under the setting sun. Then, from deep below the soil, came a noise that made my stomach twist, a wet, bubbling gurgle. The septic pump had given out. I set my tea down slowly, my heart beating faster with every second. Across the fence line, the sisters were outside their camper, laughing loud enough for me to hear clear as day. The younger one was shaking out a blanket, while the older one fiddled with a little space heater she'd hauled onto the porch. The camper glowed bright, every light on, TV flickering, maybe even a hot plate running. They were bleeding my power dry, completely oblivious to what was rising beneath their own feet. Then came the eruption, with a noise like a clogged drain exploding. Brownish water shot up near the edge of their yard. The sisters froze, staring at the ground as it bubbled, foamed, and began spilling outward in thick waves. It didn't take long before the smell hit them. Even from my porch, the stench was strong, sharp, sour, and foul enough to make me wrinkle my nose. Over there, right at the heart of it, it must have been unbearable. The younger sister shrieked first, dropping the blanket and hopping back as the mess spread toward her shoes. The older one shouted something, fumbling with the heater plug, like yanking it out of the cord would stop the flood. But it was too late. The septic tank had been straining for weeks, and now all that pressure was venting right there in their yard. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not loud, not cruel, but a low, satisfied chuckle. Nature was delivering justice better than I ever could. The sewage surged higher, frothing around the orange extension cords they'd so carefully stolen. Sparks crackled as the cords hissed in the filth, sending tiny flashes of blue light dancing across the muck. The sisters screamed again, panicking as they tried to drag the cords back to safety. But the more they pulled, the deeper they sank, the cords slurping into the sludge like spaghetti and sauce. Their camper lights flickered, dimmed, then went out completely. I leaned on the porch railing, watching as their free ride collapsed in real time. The sisters stumbled, slipping in the mud, shrieking at each other with blame. "This is your fault," the older one yelled, shoving her sister's shoulder. "You said it was fine." The younger shrieked back, her shoes already coated in brown muck. I could see the panic in their movements, the frantic flailing of people who realized too late that they had built their comfort on someone else's backhand. Now it had turned against them. The smell thickened, drifting across the field in heavy waves. My horses snorted nervously, stamping their hooves, and even the barn cats slunk away from the fence line. But me, I stayed put. I wanted to see every second of it. The mess didn't stop at a puddle. It spread like a rising tide, seeping toward their camper wheels, coating the ground in a thick, glistening sheet. The sisters ran inside, maybe thinking they'd be safe there, but within minutes, I heard them scream again, this time from inside the camper. I pictured it easily, the sewage pooling under their floor, seeping into the thin insulation, filling the air vents with a stench they'd never scrub out. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost they came stumbling out again, gagging and waving their hands in front of their faces, looking around like someone might save them. Their eyes landed on me. "There's something wrong with your system," the older one shouted across the fence, her voice shrill with panic. "You need to fix this. It's spilling into our yard." I raised my eyebrows, calm as could be. Funny, I called back. That system worked fine until you two decided to steal from it. The younger one coughed, her face red with fury. You can't just let this happen. It's illegal. I laughed outright this time, shaking my head. What's illegal, I said, is plugging into someone else's power box. What you're standing in right now. That's called consequences. They didn't like that answer. They shrieked louder, demanding I call the county, demanding I pay for the damage, demanding I take responsibility. All the while, the sewage kept bubbling up, a steady, unstoppable tide that refused to listen to their tantrums. I folded my arms and stayed silent, just watching. The older one tried to be brave, stomping through the muck to grab the cords, yanking them free of the sludge. Sparks flew again, making her yelp and stumble back. The younger one sobbed, tears mixing with the grime on her cheeks. Their perfect little scheme had turned into a nightmare, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. By now the smell was unbearable on their side. They gagged and retched, covering their mouths with their sleeves, but the stench clung to them like glue. Their camper sat surrounded, its tires half submerged in filth, their prized cords ruined, their lights out, and me. My lights were fine, my power steady. My bill, soon enough, would shrink back to normal. I stood there until the sun dipped completely, until the sisters gave up trying to salvage anything and retreated into their mother's house, covered head to toe in the punishment they'd earned. The campus sat abandoned in the rising sewage, a monument to their greed and stupidity. As the night grew darker, I felt a strange kind of peace. The Karens had been taught a lesson. No sheriff, no lecture, and no confrontation could ever have delivered. It wasn't me who brought them down, it was the very system they thought they could exploit. And I knew one thing for certain. They would never, ever plug into my box again. By Monday morning, word had already spread through town. In a place as small as ours, gossip traveled faster than wildfire on a dry day, and the tale of the Karen sisters wading knee-deep in septic sludge was too juicy for anyone to ignore. At the diner, I overheard two old ranchers laughing about how karma finally caught up with those loudmouths at the feed store. Someone asked me with a smirk if I was selling fertilizer by the truckload now. Everyone seemed to know, and everyone seemed to enjoy the story. The sisters, however, weren't enjoying anything. I spotted them the next afternoon, standing outside their mother's house with plastic bags tied around their shoes, scrubbing their clothes with a hose like they were trying to wash away the shame. Their camper still sat in the yard, half surrounded by dried filth, its once white siding now streaked brown. The cords they'd used were a lost cause, charred and stained, tangled in a heap like a reminder of their crime. For days they avoided me. No yelling, no accusations, no fake sweetness at the fence line. Just silence. It was the quietest their property had been since they moved in, and I soaked in the peace like a man finally taking off a pair of boots that never fit. My power bill dropped right back to normal the following month, and that, more than anything, was proof that justice had been served. But it wasn't just about the money anymore. Something deeper had shifted. The sisters had built their lives on being loud, entitled, and untouchable. They thrived on pushing others around, twisting stories, and pretending they were victims whenever someone pushed back. But now, their image was ruined. Everyone knew what they had done. Everyone had seen the result. For once, they couldn't spin the story in their favor. At the grocery store, I heard a woman chuckle as she told her friend, "You should have. We've seen them screaming, covered head to toe. I bet they won't be stealing from anyone else again." Even the sheriff, who usually rolled his eyes whenever their names came up, stopped me in town one day. He tipped his hat, smiled, and said, "Heard you had yourself quite an accident over there. Can't say I'm too sorry for them." The sisters, on the other hand, walked around like shadows of themselves. Their usual swagger was gone. They kept their heads down, avoided eye contact, and hurried in and out of shops like they could outrun the whispers. No one shouted at them, no one confronted them, but the weight of humiliation followed them everywhere. One evening, about a week after the disaster, I was out by the fence mending a loose post when the older sister finally approached. She looked worn out, her hair tangled, her shoes still stained from the mess. For the first time since I'd known her, her voice was soft instead of sharp. "Look," she said, not quite meeting my eyes, "we didn't mean for things to go that far. We were just trying to save a little money." I leaned on the post.com. "You were stealing from me," I said simply. She winced at the word but didn't argue. "It won't happen again, I swear. We learned our lesson." I nodded slowly. "Good, because the next time, you won't be dealing with just sewage. You'll be dealing with the sheriff." Her cheeks flushed red, and for a moment I thought she might snap back, fall into her old habits. But she didn't. She just nodded, muttered a quiet sorry, and walked away. That was the last real conversation I ever had with her. Over the next month their camper stayed abandoned. Grass began growing tall around its wheels, and the smell, faint but lingering, never quite left. Eventually, a for sale sign appeared in their yard. Rumor was they were moving in with relatives 2 towns over, hoping for a fresh start where no one knew about their septic-soaked downfall. When the day finally came, I stood on my porch as their moving truck rattled down the road. They didn't wave, they didn't look back. And as the dust settled, I felt a satisfaction deeper than any argument or fistfight could have given me. They hadn't just been punished, they'd been exposed. Their reputation, their pride, their endless noise, all washed away in the tide of their own arrogance. For me, peace returned. The pasture stayed quiet, the power box untouched, and my bills as steady as they'd ever been. Each evening I could sip my tea on the porch without waiting for the sight of an orange cord slithering across my field. The ranch was mine again, not just in property, but in spirit. Sometimes, when the air was especially still, I'd catch the faintest whiff of sewage drifting on the wind, like a ghost of the chaos that once was. It didn't bother me. If anything, it made me smile. It was a reminder that greed and arrogance never win for long. Nature has a way of settling debts, and when it does, it settles them thoroughly. The Karen sisters thought they could outsmart me, outsmart the system, outsmart everyone. But in the end, all they managed was to ruin themselves. And for the rest of us, their story became a warning and, admittedly, a source of a good laugh whenever the subject came up. Justice hadn't come from anger, or from fists, or from shouting across the fence. It had come from patience, from letting them dig their own grave until the ground gave way beneath them. And when it did, the fall was every bit as spectacular as it was deserved. As for me, I'll never forget that Sunday evening when the ground opened and swallowed their arrogance whole. And I'll never stop appreciating the quiet that followed once they were gone. Because peace, once earned, tastes even sweeter when you know it came at the expense of thieves who thought they could take it from you.